Konnichiwa, Ohayo kasama to, Kurasame to. Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, classmates. Welcome to Japan. Nihon ni yokoso. Japan's literature. Japan's literature, the body of written works produced by Japanese, or in its earliest beginnings. At a time when Japan had no written language, in the Chinese classical language. Both in quantity and quality, Japan's literature ranks as one of the major literature of the world, comparable in age, richness, and volume to English literature, though its course of development has been quite dissimilar. The title of our story is The Narrow to the Deep North by Matsuo Basho. Matsuo Basho was the most famous poet of the Edo period in Japan. During his lifetime, Basho was recognized for his works in the collaborative haikai no ringa form. Today, after centuries of commentary, he is recognized as master of brief and clear haiku. So let's start to our story. The narrow to the deep north. The days and months are travelers of eternity, just like the years that come and go. For those pass their lives afloat on boat, or face old age leading horses tied by the bridle. Their journey is life, their journeying's home. And many are the men of old who met there and end upon the road. How long ago? I wonder did I see the drift of cloud borne away upon the wind, and ceaseless dreams of wandering become aroused? Only last year I had been wandering along the coast and bays, and in the autumn I swept away the cobwebs from my tumble-down hut on the banks of the Sumida, and soon afterwards saw the old year out. But when the spring mist rose up in the sky, the gods of desire possessed me, and burned my mind with a longing to go beyond the barrier at Shirakawa. The spirits of the road beckoned me, and I could not concentrate on anything. So I patched up my trousers, put new cords in my straw hat, and strengthened my knees with moxa. A vision of the moon and Matsushima was already in my mind. I sold my hat and wrote this just before moving to a cottage owned by Sampo. This is the verse. Even this grass hat could for the new owner be a festive house of dolls. This was the first of an 8 verse sequence, which I left hanging on a post inside the hut. It was the 27th day of the third month. There was a man, thinning moon, and in the first pale light of dawn, the summit of Mount Fuji could be dimly seen. I wonder if I should ever see the cherry trees of Ueno and Yanaka again, my closest friends who had gathered together the night before, got on the boat to see me off. We disembarked at Senju, and my heart was overwhelmed by the prospect of the vast journey ahead. Ephemeral though I know the world to be, when I stood at the crossroads of parting, I wept goodbye. The spring is passing, the birds all mourn and fishes' eyes are wet with tears. I wrote this verse to begin my travel diary, and then we started off, though it was hard to proceed. Behind, my friends were standing in a row as if to watch where we were lost to sight. So that year, the second year of Genruko. I had suddenly taken it into my head to make the long journey into the deep north, to see with my own eyes places that I had only heard about, despite hardships enough to turn my hair white. I should be lucky to come back alive, but I staked my fortune on that uncertain hope. We barely managed to reach the post town of Suka by nightfall. My greatest burden was the pack I carried on my thin, bony shoulders. I had planned to set out traveling light, but had ended up taking a paper coat to keep out the cold at night, a cotton dressing gown, rainwear, and ink and brushes, as well as various farewell presents that I could not refuse that had no be accepted as burden on the way. We went to see the shrine of Muro no Yashima, or the oven-like chamber. Sora, my traveling companion, told me its story. The shrine is dedicated to the Konohana Sakuya Hime, or the princess of flowering blossoms. The goddess worshipped at Mount Fuji. The name Moro no Yashima refers to the chamber that the goddess entered and set on fire, to prove that her pregnancy was legitimate. The son she bore there was called Ho Ho Dimi, or born of the flames. This is why poems about the place often mention smoke. This must also be the reason why a fish called konoshiro is never eaten here. When grilled, it smells like burning human flesh. On the last night of the third month, we found lodgings at the foot of Mount Nikko. The innkeeper introduced himself as Kuzaimon the Buddha. I'm known as the because I'm known as that because I put honesty first and foremost in everything I do. You can sleep here safe tonight with your minds at ease. We wonder what kind of Buddha it was that had taken on human form in the troubled, filthy world to help two beggar pilgrims. I observed him carefully and saw that, however ignorant or clumsy he might have seemed, he was indeed a man of stubborn honesty. He was a man close to the Confucian ideal of perfection, strong, simple, straightforward. I found his purity of heart most admirable. On the first day of the fourth month, we went to worship at the mountain shrine. In ancient times, the name of the mountain was written Nikko, or the mountain of two storms. But when the great teacher Kukai built a temple here, he changed the name to Nikko, or sunlight. Nikko, or sunlight. He, sh- he must had the power to see the 1,000 years beyond, for the radiance of the shrine now shines throughout the heavens. Its blessings flow over the land to the farthest corners, and all the people live in security and peace. I was awestruck, barely able to tell in words. How holy a place! Green leaves, young leaves, and through them the sunlight now burst. Mount Kurokami, or Mount Ravenhair, though veiled in mist, was still white with snow. Sora composed a poem. Here is the poem. I shaved off my hair, and now at Kurokami I changed to new clothes. Sora is his pen name. His real name is Kawai Suguro. He built a house beside the lower leaves of my basho tree and used to help me with the chores of chopping firewood and drawing water. He was delighted at the thought of seeing Matsushima and Sigata at and came to keep me company and share the hardships of the road. The morning we left, he shaved his head and changed into priest's black robes, and took the name of Sugo, or the Enlightened One. That is why he wrote the Mount Kurokami poem. The words I changed to new clothes I find particularly effective. A mile or so up the mountain was a waterfall. The water leaps forth from a hollow in the ridge, and tumbles down 100 feet into a dark green pool strewn with thousand stones. You can squeeze between the rocks and cascade and see the waterfall from behind. Hence, its name, Ora Minotaki, or Rear View Falls. Alone behind the waterfall, a little while, now summer retreat. I had an acquaintance who lived in Korabene in Nasu, so we decided to take the shortest route straight across the plain. We took a bearing from a village in the distance, but as we walked, the rain began to fall and the darkness closed in. We took lodgings for the night at a farmhouse and next morning started off again across the plain. We came upon a horse grazing and a farmer cutting grass. We asked him the way. Although simple, rustic man, he was full of sympathy. He pondered a while, then said, "What would be the best thing to do? The trails here crisscross all over the place, and strangers like you could easily get lost. That worries me. I let you have the horse when he won't go any farther. Just send him back." And with that, he lent us his horse. Two small children followed us, running behind the horse. One of them, a little girl, was called Kasani, or Double. It was such an unusual and charming name that Sora wrote about it. Kasani must be the name given the wild pink with double petals. Before long, we reached a village and turned the horse back home with some money tied to the saddle. We called on Jubuji, senior pro-governor of Kurabani. He was delighted to see us so unexpectedly and kept us chatting away days and nights together. His younger brother, Tosowi, seized every chance to talk with us and invited us to his own home, as well as introducing us his relatives and friends, and so the time passed by. One day, we took a stroll to the outskirts of the town and saw the remains of the old dog shooting grounds. We pressed farther out on the plains to pay our respects at the tomb of Lady Tamamu and then at the shrine of Hachiman. We were especially moved when we heard that it was to this god that Yoichi had cried as he aimed his arrow at the fan. As darkness fell, we returned to Toisi's house. Nearby there was a mountain called temple called Komyuji. We were invited there and worshipped in the hall of the ascetic. In summer mountains, we say prayers before shoes. Journey now begins. Behind Oganji temple in his province, up in mountains was a hermitage where priest Butcho used to live. Butcho once told me that he had inscribed the following poem on a rock in charcoal made for a pipe. Oh, oh, how much I loathe building a shelter at all. Even a grass thatch hut not 5 feet long or wide. If only it never rained. I wanted to see what remained of the hut, and so, walking staff in hand, I set out. A group of young people accompanied me on the way, chattering away happily, and before I knew it, we had reached the foot of the mountain. It seemed so deep. A valley path stretched far into the distance, lined by darkly clustering pines and cedars. Dew dripped from the moss, and even though it was the fourth month, the air still felt cold. We had when we had passed all the fen sites. We crossed a bridge and the temple gate. Eager to discover the site of the hermitage, I scrambled up the hill behind the temple to a tiny hut built upon a rock, leaning against a cave. It was like coming upon the death gate of the monk Miao, or the stone chamber of the monk Fayon. I left an impromptu verse on a post in the hut. Even woodpeckers leave the hermitage untouched in the summer trees. From Korobani, I headed towards the killing stone on a horse lent to us by Jubuchi. The man leading the horse asked if I would write a poem for him. Pleasantly surprised that he had such artistic interests, I gave him this. Turn the horse's head towards the plain. Pull there now, a cocos calling. The killing stones stand in the dark mountain shadow near a hot spring. The gases emanating from the rock were full of poison steel. So many bees and butterflies and other insects lay dead in the heaps around it. You couldn't tell the color of the sand. And Shino, the weeping willow that Saigyo celebrated, where pure and crystal water flows, stands on the bank between two rice fields. A local official there, a man called Kuhu, had often said how much she would like to show me the tree, and I'd often wondered exactly where it stood. Now I rested its shade. One whole field of rice. I had all been sown before I left the willow tree. Day and after day had passed in vague and easeless. But now we approached the barrier at Shirakawa, and for the first time I felt that our journey had truly begun. I could understand why the poet had felt at the spot that he wanted to send word to the people in the capital that he had crossed the barrier. As one of the three barriers to the north, Shirakawa has always appealed to poets and writers. Yet, even as I delighted in the green leaves of the trees, an autumn wind seemed to sound in my ears, and crimson leaves danced in my mind's eyes. The whiteness of Jutizia, the white rumbling roses made us feel as we're crossing in the barrier in snow. According to Kiyusuke, people of long ago straightened their hats as they crossed and changed their clothes. Sora wrote, "Sprigs of Jutizia adorn our hats, formal dress for the barrier." We passed the barrier and crossed the Abukuma River. On our left, the peak of Aizu soared up high. On our right, the districts of Iwaki, Suma, and Miharu stretched out. Behind us, the range of hills that separated the provinces of Hitachi and Shimotsuki. We passed Kagunuma, or the Shadow Pond, but the sky was overcast that day, and so there were no reflections. At the post town of Sukagawa, we visited a poet called Tokyo, who puts up for 4 or 5 days. The first thing he asked was, "How did you feel as you crossed the barrier at Shirakawa?" I replied that the hardships of our long journey had exhausted me in the body and spirit. Enchanted by the beauty of the landscape, and so much moved by the memories of the past that it awakened. I had not been able to compose a decent poem, yet it would be a shame to let the crossing go unrecorded. So I wrote, "Imagination's birth, a song for planting to rise in the deep far north." From this opening, we added a second verse and then a third until we had completed 3 sequences. On the outskirts of the town, in the shade of a huge chestnut tree, there lived a monk who had turned his back upon the world. The lonely quietness of his hermitage reminded me of another place deep in the mountains, where horse chestnuts had been gathered. I jotted down a few words. The character for chestnut means westry, indicating its connection with the paradise to the west. It said that the priest Gyugi used the wood all his life for his walking sticks and the pillars of his house. People in the world hardly notice these blossoms, chestnuts, by the eaves. Some 12 miles or so from Tokyo's house, just beyond Hiwada, is Mount Asaka. It rises up close to the road and there are many marshes around about. It was almost the season for picking Katsumi iris. We kept on asking, "Which plant is the flowering Katsumi?" But no one knew. We wandered about the marshes, asking everyone the same question, till the sun sunk behind the rim of the hills. We turned off to the right at Nihon Matsu, paid a hasty visit to the cave at Kuruzuka, and stopped for the night at Fukushima. The following morning, we set off to Shinobu in search of the fern-print rock. We found it half buried in the soil of a remote hamlet overshadowed by a mountain. Some village children came up and told us that in the old days the stone had stood on top of the mountain, but the people who went up there to rub the cloth on the stone which with ferns had torn off leaves of barley too. The farmers had become so annoyed. They had pushed the stone down into the valley, which was why it was now lying upside down. The story was not impossible. Hens planting seedlings were hens once rubbing patterns with ferns long ago. We crossed the river by the ferry at Tsukinowa, or Moon Hollow, and arrived at a post town called Sinue, or Rapid's Head. The ruined mansion where Sato Sujo had once lived was about 4 miles away on the left, close to the mountains. We were told it was at Sabano in the village of Lizuka. We asked directions as we went along, until we came to a place called Maruyama. This was where the warrior's house had stood. They told us that the great gate had been at the foot of the mountain, and my eyes glazed with tears. Still standing at an old temple nearby were the tombstones of the family. The most moving were the memorials to the two young wives. Women though they were, they left behind them such a name for courage. My sleeve was wet with tears. You do not have to go so very far away to find a tombstone that makes you weep. We went inside the temple to ask for tea, and saw that among its treasures were the sword of Yoshisumi and the satchel basket that Benki carried. Both sword and satchel shone for boys' festive day, when paper banners fly. It was the first day of the 5th month. We stayed the night at Lizuka. We bathed in the hot springs there and the rented room. The inn turned out to be the wretched hovel, with straw mats spread over the dirt floor. There wasn't even a lamp, so we made our beds in the light from a hearth fire and lay down. Throughout the night, the thunder rumbled and the rain poured down torrents. What with the roof leaking down on just where we lay, and the fleas and mosquitoes biting, I couldn't sleep at all. To make matters worse, my old complaint flared up again, causing such pain I almost fainted. The short summer night came to an end at last. We set off again. I hired a horse to the post station of Gori, still feeling the after effects of the night before. I was worried about my sickness when such a great distance still remained ahead. But I told myself that when I started on his journey to the remotest regions, I'd been aware of giving up all worldly things and facing life's journey to the remotest regions. I'd been aware of giving up all worldly things and facing life transience. If I should die on the road, that would be heaven's will. Such thoughts helped restore my spirits a little, and I passed through the great gate of death with some boldness in my step. Passing by Amizuri and Shiroishi Castle, we arrived at the district of Kasijima and inquired about the grave of the governor Sanikata of the Fujiwara family. A man told us, "Those villages you can see at the foot of the mountain, way off to the right, are Minowa and Kasajima. The shrine to the spirits of the road and the memorial of pampas grass are still there." After the heavy rains of previous days, the road was in the awful state, and I was so tired that we contented ourselves with simply looking that way we trudged on. The names Minowa, or raincoat, and Kasajima, or umbrella, were so well suited to the rainy season that I wrote this verse. So whereabouts is Rain Hat's Isle? How far along muddy roads of June? We stayed the night at Iwa Noma. The Prince of Takikuma is truly an amazing sight. The trunk forks into two just above the ground, confirming that this is just how the old tree must have looked. I thought immediately of the priest Noen. Long ago, a nobleman newly appointed to serve as governor of Mutsu had felled the tree and used the wood as pilings for a bridge over the Naturi River. Noen wrote in a poem, "No trace is left now of the pine." I was told that generation after generation the pine had been felled, yet a new one replanted. After perhaps 1,000 years, the present pine is still quite perfect in shape. When I had started my journey,
Kyohaku had given me a poem as a farewell present. Lately cherry blossoms let my master see the pine. Atakikuma. I now wrote in reply. Since the cherries bloomed, I have longed to see the twin pine. 3 long months have passed. We crossed the river Naturi and went into Sindai. It was the day the people hung blue irises beneath the eaves. We found an inn where we stayed for 4 or 5 days in the town. There was a painter called Kaimon. I had heard he was a man of truly artistic taste, and I got to know him, to locate, and one day he took us to see some of them. The fields of Miyagino were thick with the brush clover, and I could imagine the sight in autumn. It was a season when the berries flowered around Tamada, Yukono, and Tutsugakuuka. We walked through a fine pine forest to think that sunlight could not penetrate at all, and were told its name, Konoshita, or under the trees. The dripping dew must have been heavy there even in ancient times. For in one poem, a servant is asked to tell Lord to take a straw hat. We offered prayers at Yakushido Shrine and the shrine at Tenjin before the day drew to a close. As parting gifts, Kaimon presented us with the sketches of Matsushima and Shiyogama and various other local places. He also gave us 2 pairs of straw sandals with straps deep iris blue. These presents showed how much a man of cultivated taste he was. I will bind the iris blossoms around about my feet, straps for my sandals. Following the drawings that Kaimon had provided, we came to the tofu sedge growing at the foot of the mountains where the narrow road to the deep north runs. The local people apparently still make 10-stranded matting each year for presentation to the provincial governor. We found the Tsutsubut stone monument at Tagaju in the village of Ichikawa. The stone is a little over 6 feet high and about 3 feet wide. Once the moss covering the stone had been scraped away, letters could be faintly seen beneath, recording the distance to all 4 corners of the country. There was an inscription also, said, "This castle was built in the first year of Jinki or 724 by Ono no Azumabito, Inspector and Governor General. It was repaired in the 6th year of Tempio Huji by Imi no Asumi Asakari, Councilor, Governor of the Eastern Sea and Eastern Mountain Districts and Governor General. First day of the 12th month." So the funding took place during the reign of the Emperor Shumo. Of all the many places celebrated in the poetry since ancient times, most have vanished. Mountains have crumpled, rivers taken new courses, and roads new routes. Stones have been buried and hidden in the earth, and old trees have given way to saplings. Time passes and the world changes, but here, before my eyes, was a monument that had endured 1,000 years. I felt that I could understand the feelings of the people of the past. This, I thought, is the traveler's reward. This is the joy of having lived so long. I forgot the hardships of the road, and I was moved to tears. We stopped along the Tama River of Nuda and at Okonishi, the great stone in the lake, both made famous in poetry. On Suno Matsuyama, or the Endless Pines, a temple with the same name, Mashuzan, had been built everywhere among the pine trees, graves were spread, they filled me with a great sadness and reminded me that all the vows to be a single pair of wings or intertwining branches came in the end into this. As we came to Shiyugama Bay, the evening bell was tolling. The sky had cleared a little after steady rain. Under the faint rays of evening moon, the island of Magiaki could be seen not far from shore. A line of small fishing boats came rowing in. I could hear the voices of the fishermen as they divided up their catch, and I understood now that the portmanteau who wrote, "It touches the heart." A fishing boat pulled ashore. That night, I listened to the stories of Hiki, or traditional dancing songs. He was performing close to my bed, and I found that the rustic tones of his voice very noisy. But then I realized how admirable it was that such fine old customs were still preserved in this distant land. Early in the next morning, we visited the shrine at Shiyugama, which had been restored by the governor of the province. Its pillars are good, huge, and majestic. Brightly painted rafters sparkled, and stone steps rose up flight after flight. The crimson fencing was dazzling in the morning sunlight. How wonderful it was, I thought, that in this land of ours the divine powers of the gods should show themselves even in so remote a place as this. In front of the sanctuary, there was an old lantern with an inscription on each iron door, presented by Izumi no Saburo in the third year of Bunji. It was strange how these words brought back things and unchanged for over 500 years. Izumi no Saburo had been a brave and honorable soldier, a loyal and loving son. His fame has lasted to the present day. Presented by Izumi no Saburo in third year of Bunji. It was strange how these words brought back things and unchanged over 500 years. Izumi no Saburo had been a brave and honorable soldier, a loyal and loving son. His fame has lasted to the present day, and there is no one who does not honor him. How true it is that, if men strive to walk in the way of truth and uphold righteousness, fame will follow of itself. It was nearly noon. We hired a boat and crossed to Matsushima. After 5 miles in the water, we landed on the beach of the island of Ujima. No matter how often it has been said, Matsushima is the most beautiful place in all Japan, and can easily hold its own against Chongqing or the Western Lake in China. The sea surges and the sea surge in the form the southeast into a bay 7 miles across, its waters brimming full like the Ziyang River in the China. There are more islands than anyone could count. On the 11th, we visited the temple of Zuigan. Long ago, 32 generations before the present, Makabe no Hishiro had entered Buddhist orders, gone to China to study, and then returned to found the temple later under the goodly influence of the monk Ongo. Its 7 hills had been rebuilt. Now the temple was a great center of worship, with dazzling golden walls, a true paradise on earth. Yet still I wondered where the holy man Kinbutsu's temple might have been. This is all my part, and Miss Glimmery Bernil will continue.